Hi, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show, your one-stop shop for all things Commanders. It's an Inside the Command Center episode, and Kevin Sheehan from the Team 980 is here to help us get in there and see what's going on. Kev, always good to see you, buddy.
What's up, boys? Happy New Year.
Yep, Happy New Year. A season gone by, Kevin. You know, it's funny with the NFL, man. One day you're up, the next day you're just out. It happens all over the league. It's not just Washington, but it's just amazing where we sit right now compared not even to just the end of last year, which was incredible, but the start of last year with so much promise. I don't understand what happened here. I don't mind moving on from Cliff. That's fine. I actually think getting him into some sort of, I think getting Jaden into some sort of West Coast offense is better for him long term anyway. But they knew the kind of offense that Cliff ran. Adam Peters has been on record saying it's Quinn's decision who the offensive coordinator is. And we're not saying, George and I have been talking about Blau for a while already. That was going to be a serious option. I guess Quinn said he learned from his time in Atlanta that you go with your gut on play callers. This to me is not about that. It's about how much involvement did Adam Peters have? How much does Dan Quinn and what happened? The offense wasn't the problem, Kevin.
The offense wasn't the problem, Doug. You're right. I mean, it wasn't what it was last year, but there are obvious reasons. The quarterback only played in 4 games, start to finish. That dooms 99% of the teams when your quarterback is your best player, and they didn't have him for this season. So I think it was Quinn primarily. Start there. Number 2 is, they're not scapegoating Cliff Kingsbury. I mean, that's a ridiculous way to kind of think about it. They just have a different philosophy, Quinn does, on what he wants to see offensively. I've said, and people have taken me to task on it. I think he overachieved this year with what he had, Kingsbury. I thought the offense was better than it should have been, given the players that they were putting on the field week in and week out. People will say, well, Quinn knew what he was getting, like you said, Doug, but he changed his mind. Last year he loved it. This year, he probably started to think differently about it. And you're allowed to do that. Now, you better be right. He better be right, because
about
the
all
defense,
this offseason.
Yeah, the defensive coordinator was an obvious thing, and he probably pulled the trigger too late, because we saw 2 years or a year and a half with Joe Witt Jr. of just bad defense, and really this year atrocious defensive football. With Cliff, you're moving on from a guy who in 2 years did a very good job, and you're going to an unproven 30-year-old, which we've all heard since the moment they hired him. He's the next thing. He's the guy that you're not going to be able to let leave the building. And they didn't. And he's got probably more Ben Johnson and maybe even some Kevin O'Connell in him. And they probably like that more. But they just need to be right, because there's no guarantee, just because the guy's really smart, that he'll be able to execute and pull it off in the preparation for a game on Sunday and then calling it once the game begins. I'm okay with it, but I think for Dan, even though there will be a lot of context at the end of next season if they're not in the postseason, but this is a big year, and this is one of the reasons it makes it even bigger. Excuse me.
That's a great segue to what I was going to ask you, Kevin. I was wondering if you took issue to the way they approached the offseason offensive coordinator pursuit, like hiring David Blau, very quick in the process. I guess, are you optimistic about his hire, step one? And then step 2, it seemed like they're aiming for continuity and maybe I'm assuming maybe appeasing Jaden Daniels a little bit, because it seemed like there's a relationship there between him and Blau. Do you think that there should be any input from the quarterback with, potentially having his offensive coordinator there? Like, what do you take issue with that, and you take issue with the whole process altogether? And was there anyone else that you wanted instead?
I don't. I mean, I understand the pushback on, well, Mike McDaniel's out there, wait for him. But what if you don't get Mike McDaniel? What if he becomes a head coach and Stefanski becomes a head coach? And and Blau's gone, and he's the OC in Detroit, or he's the OC in Baltimore, or wherever, because you can't block it for that long when he's going for OC, interviews. Last year, you can block it because he's looking at, other position coach spots. But this year, if it's an OC, if you're not going to give him an OC interview, yeah. So I think it's who they liked all along. I think Quinn's liked this guy since he showed up in the building. And I think he always thought, well, if Cliff ends up taking a head coaching job after a really good season, which he could have last year in New Orleans, perhaps in front of Kellen Moore, then we've got our guy. And he just pulled the trigger sooner. And that's been his guy. So he's got to be right about it. But because this was the guy, look, I think there's a really good chance if Blau wasn't in the building, that Cliff would still be here. Now, maybe they would have gone out and made a run at McDaniel or Stefanski or somebody else. But it was Blau, I think, all along that made it easier to move on from Cliff, even before McDaniel became available.
What do they go about kind of the oldest roster in the league? We talk about the job AP's got to do. How are they to fix the problem?
They need a lot of players, Doug. I mean,
right?
Defense, they need a lot. To fix the offense, they got to fix the defense. You can't have that offense next year healthy. Let's assume that it will be. I mean, hopefully, walking out onto the field knowing that they need 28 plus every week to even have a chance. Last year was it was a good fortune year, clearly. But part of the good fortune is not that offensively they were playing bad defensive football teams. I mean, they had more success against the best defense than anybody did at the end of last year, the two games against Philadelphia. But defensively, they got breaks in facing second and third string quarterbacks. All along the way, the Spencer Rattlers and the, Jake Hainers and the, Jalen Hurts going out and Pickett coming in. And we know the list. They got lucky. They were bad defensively last year, but if that defense had faced this year's schedule, it would have been horrendous and they wouldn't have had a chance to overcome it. So next year, to fix the offense and to fix the team, you got to start with defense. You can't be that bad defensively and have a legitimate chance to maybe you can win more games than you lose, but barely. And then to have a legitimate chance in the postseason, you could never trot out what they put out on the field last year. So it starts with defense. I think they need, realistically, they can't get 11 new starters or even 6 or 7 new starters, although you could make the case they need 6 or 7 new starters. But you need 3 to 4 new starters. And I'm talking about guys that are ready to play right away. So that can only be solved via trade or free agency. And then you've really got to get lucky with your first few picks in the draft if they end up being defensive players that they're ready to go, ASAP. And then, of course, the coordinator is a massive hire. They got less out of more, and they didn't have much. You need more a coach who can get more out of less. And that's going to be a big hire here in the next few days, maybe.
We'll get to that here in a second. I want to go back just for a moment with the offensive coordinator hire. With Cliff picked everybody else on the staff, right? I mean, will they allow the first-time offensive coordinator to do that?
I don't know. I don't think Cliff picked everybody on that offensive staff.
Really? I was told that he had.
Yeah, no, I don't think everybody on that staff. I think some of the people on that staff. Remember, he liked Blau too. He coached Blau in Arizona. But I think, there are a few on that staff that came in because of Quinn. I think a lot of the staff came in because of their respect for Quinn. But no, the answer would be Blau probably will have a say in the quarterback's coach, the assistant quarterback's coach, the O-line coach. But that's the head coach and his responsibility to hire out the entire staff with certainly input from his coordinators. And in some cases, the coordinators are like, no, let's go get him for these reasons. And I think there were a couple of guys for Cliff, less for Joe Witt Jr.
So, Kevin, going back to the defense, what does that say about Dan Quinn, right? Obviously, he's a defensive-minded coach. It's his hallmark to have a attacking defense, a turnover-prone defense, something that kind of can, flip the field a little bit. And it's funny, 2 consecutive defensive coaches, Ron Rivera, Dan Quinn, coming over here to DC, and we don't see any production on the defensive side of the ball. What's your level of confidence in him? Do you think it's maybe schematic? Do you think it's a lack of talent on that side of the ball? What would you attest to the defense being supportive here, and how do we fix it, I suppose?
Interestingly, though, you just made me think of something. Ron Rivera's defense in 2022 was very good.
Yeah,
That's that 2022 defense led that team into playoff contention late in that season. And 2021, when they got on that roll before all the COVID losses, they were playing pretty well. But yeah, look, they were a more organized defense when Quinn took it over. Prior to the Madrid game against Miami from Joe Witt Jr. They were more organized, but they're just so limited. They were limited by players to begin with, but then the injuries. I mean, their top 3 defensive ends go down. Their top 2 corners go down. They lost their best safety, or the safety they thought was their best for a big portion of the season. They just weren't equipped with even the best of coaching to be a good defense. Could he have coached it up to something approaching, mediocre? Maybe. But they were
it
really.
Makes what Robert Saleh's doing out in San Francisco impressive.
It is, but that's not a good defensive football team. San Francisco. Yeah.
They've got the 3rd stringers out there too now.
They do, and they've been, run over defensively. They've done a great job offensively, though. I mean, Kyle's done a phenomenal job. And they played well against the Eagles, but the Eagles offensively aren't great. But, Chicago, I don't think Chicago punted in that game. Seattle should have scored 30 in that game. They missed field goals. The whole thing. But to your point, Saleh's good. I agree with you, and he's gotten more out of the loss of Warner and Bosa, et cetera, than probably they would have expected. But the question about Quinn being a defensive head coach, the defense has been terrible for 2 years. And you don't want that with a defensive head coach. So it's players, it's perhaps coordinator. This year, you got to throw in that most of their best players didn't play a lot of the season.
I was thinking when Ben Albright was on, he was talking about getting somebody from that Houston staff that the defense is just so good. And it plays kind of like what Dan wants to do, right? Like, here's what we're going to do on defense. We don't care if you know what it is. You can't stop it. He was talking about the pass game coordinator for the defense there, a young, bright, up-and-coming guy. Can they afford to – can Quinn afford to go that route? Like, can you have 2 coordinators that haven't called a game before?
No, he doesn't want that. He wants somebody that he can turn the keys over to and say, it's your defense, you're going to coordinate it and call it. I don't think he wants to do that anymore. And I think with Joe Witt Jr. as a first-time coordinator, Quinn had to be kind of a part of it. Yes, right. But remember, with Houston, they've also got incredible talent. I mean, Hunter and Will Anderson Jr. as edge rushers, I mean, that's scary. But yeah, I mean, the Seattle staff, the McDonald's staff, if you were going that route, you'd look that way. But I feel confident it's going to be somebody with a high level of, resume and experience. And we know the names. I mean, Brian Flores, they're interviewing today. I don't know that Brian Flores is gettable because I'm sure Minnesota wants to keep him and will pay him. Maybe Washington can give him whatever he wants to get it done. We know Raheem's
interesting. 2 different styles philosophically, right? Like Dan wants to drop as many into coverage as possible, and Flores wants to send the house. What do you say, George? Dan Quinn is the carrot, and Flores is the stick.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd like Flores. That'd be my choice.
Quinn's evolved. There's been a lot of different iterations of his defense, going back to, single high, exclusively in Seattle with the Legion of Boom, but he had great talent there. He had great talent, with Micah Parsons, certainly. He had better talent, with Parsons in Dallas. And even those corners they coached up, Bland and Diggs had their best seasons with Quinn as the defensive coordinator, you could argue. I think at this point, you better be an improved defensive team next year, or no matter how good you are offensively, it's not, I don't know if it'll hold up. Can they win 9 with great? In this day and age, you can win 9 or 10 with great offense and go to the playoffs and a bad defense. But can you win 3 games when you get there to get to the Super Bowl with a bad defense? No. Flores would be so interesting. He'd be my number one.
Absolutely.
Fangio and Flores are the two that you hear over and over again. If you're, whoever's playing Minnesota, whoever's playing Philly each week, if you just listen to the head coach or the OC, if the head coach isn't an offensive guy, they'll just rave about the difficulty in preparing for those two. By the way, Jesse Minter's developed a little bit of that reputation as well with the Chargers. Very difficult to prepare for. In Houston, D'Amico Ryans, et cetera, and company, they're actually pretty basic. They just have ridiculous talent. Ridiculous talent.
Yeah.
Philly, too.
Absolutely. I find it very interesting, the dichotomy that he wants an established defensive play caller and a first-year offensive play caller. He's not necessarily scared of that because, in theory, because he's a defensive-minded coach, you'd think he'd maybe want, maybe foster or grow a new defensive coordinator because he can develop them that way and have an established offensive coordinator and not have to worry about that. But that's just me thinking out loud.
Well, he went that route and it didn't work out.
That's true.
So maybe he
from it.
Yeah, I think he's learned from it. And he was much more active, obviously, in Atlanta as a defensive coordinator. And he had Jeff Ulbrich there, and he had Raheem there. Yeah.
That makes sense. I guess my follow-up to that is obviously Brian Flores is the home run pick. We all want him to be our defensive coordinator, or at least I'm speaking for myself out loud. Let's say Brian Flores isn't available, Kevin. Is there a second or third option as you really like?
I like Gannon. I think Gannon's really smart and can really coordinate and call a defense.
Okay.
I'm not the biggest Raheem guy. Everybody in the business,
Raheem, right?
Everybody in that business in football, they all love Raheem. Yeah. Raheem is a first-class guy, and people just love Raheim, and they think he's really smart. Jeff Ulbrich has been protected right now by Atlanta. He worked with Quinn. Al Harris is out there. Those are the names we're hearing. Obviously, they interviewed already Patrick Graham, who's got a very interesting resume and background. But man, can you imagine if they got Brian Flores to be the defensive coordinator? Now he needs players. He had players in Minnesota. Grenard. He had Van Ginkel. He had a really smart veteran safety in Harrison Smith. They had players there. Here they need another 4 to 5 legitimate frontline starter players. Talent wise, or the coordinator is only going to be able to do so much.
So quick follow-up to that. I was listening to the Junkies when I was driving into work today, and EB brought up a great point. He was saying that, is the Washington defensive job even desirable, right? There's a lack of talent right now. There were some points that they were giving up this year. Maybe having a defensive-minded coach kind of overseeing you might be intimidating as well. What would be appealing for Brian Flores to come over to DC? Is it simply money, Kevin, or what are your thoughts?
The same thing that makes Washington appealing, for anybody. Jaden Daniels.
Okay.
Even for a defensive coordinator,
the offense can put up enough points. The defensive coordinator gets to get a little,
You want to be on a team that you're not out there with the offense not scoring points. Brian Flores wants a 2-score lead in the third and fourth quarter, so he can really get after it. Which you saw last year in Minnesota when they had Darnold and they were beating people, winning 13 or 14 games, whatever it was. I think it was 14. I think that he doesn't have that in Minnesota. They've got a big question mark at quarterback and on offense right now. So maybe that's why he'd be looking to move on. Money, obviously, we'll talk. But Quinn has a great reputation. Coaches like Quinn. The coaching industry likes Quinn. He's highly respected. So he'll give you a chance of attracting a really good D coordinator as well. Typically a D coordinator would prefer to be with an offensive head coach, so he has total autonomy. So Quinn's going to have to tell, a Flores in particular, or even a Gannon, it's your show to get those guys. Whereas Joe Witt Jr., first-time coordinator, it was more collaborative, I'm assuming.
I think Peters, maybe it was in their end-of-the-year presser that was asked about this year and kind of what he learned, and he mentioned the Terry McLaurin situation and how maybe he learned something that waiting it out like that for basically the same thing they wanted, it didn't help anybody. I wonder how that will affect the Tunsil deal. I would assume they want to get that done sooner than later.
Well, Tunsil's without representation, but he's got people that work for him.
Yep.
Look, the Terry situation, and even when he was asked about it, I thought it was very interesting that he said, we've kind of both, it
Yeah.
was an experience where we both may have learned something. And I think if you, had him out there speaking full truth injected with truth serum, he'd tell you we were incredibly generous to offer what we offered, and they were delusional, and that's what made it take so long. And ultimately, they didn't need to be delusional because they didn't land on anything resembling what they wanted.
No, they took the same deal, basically.
And so the Tunsil thing, I don't know. He's a player, though, that you have to extend and you have to get done.
Damn right.
I felt all along, I want Terry extended. I want him here for beyond just 2025. But I feel more strongly about it with Tunsil. Tunsil's a top 5 player at his position.
He's probably the best player on our team besides if you want to say him or Jaden Daniels, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Tunsil's legit.
Probably Tunsil.
Yeah, I agree.
Tunsil's probably the second best player on the team.
I agree.
Yes.
And do you think they'll get that done?
Yes.
Do they have to get the deal done before next season starts, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're learning a little bit about Peters. I don't know if the McLaurin situation is going to be identical, if it's the best learning experience, because I do think that it was as much about the agent and the player as it was about the team, if not a lot more. But remember, in San Francisco, they let a lot of those deals go. And the extensions go until late August, early September. I hope it doesn't happen that way, because then we're going to have to talk about it the entire summer. So I hope it gets done sooner. But there's no doubt that you have to extend Tunsil, and then you get to some of the other guys that are possibilities. Like I wonder what they'll do with Luvu, with Biotish,
Deron Payne.
I think Duran's gone.
I was going to ask you. I'll go to my next question. What are your thoughts on it? Do you think will he stay here in DC, or do you want him to stay here in DC? And do you think he will? I guess my question for Payne.
So I've always been a big Duran fan, but he's not worth $28 million next year.
Yeah, I agree.
On the cap.
Yeah,
not even close. So you'd have to, to keep him, there'd have to be a major restructuring. He'd have to agree to it. Then you wouldn't, look, you'd realize significant cap savings by trading him or releasing him. I don't know what you'd get back for Duran with that contract. That's the thing. Yeah. It's not a lot.
Exactly.
Let's run through some names real quick. You tell me what you think. Chris Paul, yes or no? Guards are getting paid these days. He was really good, but do you think he'll be back?
Definitely. Got it. You have to keep him. You have to sign him.
You mentioned Biotis. Is there an upgrade out there? Is there an upgrade to be had over Biotis?
I don't know. That's a good question. I haven't studied like the centers in free agency in general, although it's not a great free agency year in general. But Biotis can play. I like the offensive line the way it is. You got to bring Paul back. You've got to extend Tunsil. And I think, you've got a pretty good offensive line. The issue with Biotis is, do you want to talk about extending him at this point? With what the last year of his deal coming up. Mm-hmm. But I like the O-line. To me, it was the one area in which it was good and it got better as the season went along. Obviously, part of that is because Cosme came back.
Bobby Wagner.
That's a tough one. I mean, I think they want him back.
Yeah.
And I think that, part of it might be on the new. Part of it might be the new defensive coordinator.
I was going to ask you that. Well, does that matter? I'm sure it does, right?
I wonder if there was kind of an under the table deal, like they continued letting him play this season when they needed not do it because he was going after a tackle record. I think that's easy to know now, and he's got another record coming up next year for whether it's more tackles or games played. And I wonder if they said, "We'll let you finish out if you come back and you can do your records here."
I think the reason he was out there for every snap in every game is because they felt much better with him on the field on every snap in every game, because he was like essentially the guy that was keeping it together, even though it didn't ever really look like it was together. He's an absolute, tackler supreme, the best of his generation, certainly up there. That hasn't dipped at all. I like him as a pass rusher. I think he's still effective as a pass rusher. We all know that where he struggles is in coverage. Maybe with a new defensive coordinator, we don't have to see him in coverage. But I think there's a chance he's back.
Von Miller.
What do you guys think about it? Because I think that's an interesting one. If he wants to play, you know that Quinn would love to have him back. Peters loves him too.
Sure.
The players love him.
Yeah,
Jaden loves him.
he does. Their lockers are right next to each other in the locker room.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I agree. I think you nailed it, Kevin. I think it's a polarizing topic. I think he brings a lot of net positive to the team. I think he's a coach on the field, keeps the team together. If he's okay coming back in reserve packages and playing part-time or in obvious run situations or early downs, I'm not opposed to that by any means, but we do need to obviously it's a blood in the water league. People have exposed him in coverage and running backs isolated on him as a middle linebacker. So they do need some more offensive talent. Athletic talent in that regard. So maybe Jordan McGee's the answer. They sub him out. But I think it really does come down to the defensive coordinator, because if they're going to be somebody that's going to be dropping him in coverage, he's going to be exploited often. So, but I mean, if they can get him back for cheap and he wants to stay here, who knows? But his Howard University degree is done. So we'll see. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, he got his.
Like when you look at the agency, you could get like a Quay Walker, which is an upgrade.
I like Quay Walker.
I love him, and you know, Georgia guy, would love to have him here. They could use him, but I'm not necessarily sure he's a green dot guy either. That's the only problem is I'm not sure there's a ton of green dot guys out there.
There aren't. That's why he was on the field for every single snap of every single game on a bad defense. I mean, imagine if he hadn't been out there. I mean, they were a bad tackling team. Imagine he wasn't on the field tackling.
Once they were done, though, wouldn't it have been nice just to see if McGee could use the dot? Like you'd get smoked those last couple of games anyway. I didn't see what did it hurt not putting the dot on McGee and letting him call a defense and just see if we've got anything at all moving forward next year.
Well, first of all, you may have hit on the reason, the tackles number that he was going for. Yeah, right. But I also think, like, I get asked about Kane Medrano, oddly enough. And I think there's always stuff that we just don't know. There's a reason it's not out on the field. I mean, they've got good reason because they played everybody this year. They played basically 2 practice squads worth of players this year. Mm-hmm. There were opportunities for everybody if they were comfortable enough to put them on the field. Obviously, they weren't comfortable enough to put them on the field enough.
Deebo Samuel.
I thought he had a good season. And I think if the quarterback had been healthy and the wide receiver had been healthy and the wide receiver 2 had been healthy and running back 1 had been healthy, I think that Deebo would have had a big year. I mean, he had statistically a decent year to begin with on a team that didn't have any other players. But, you know, he's also banged up a lot. But we knew that anyway. I don't know what kind of market there will be for Deebo. He might find a team that falls in love with him and pays him a lot more than it's the price. It comes down to the price. But I liked what he gave us this year.
And he changed games when he was able to return kicks. Like
early in the season.
I did not expect to get those kind of new rule change. You know, us old guys don't really think about it in that kind of way. But he was massive that way. For a while, they were first in kick return yards for a minute.
And then they had to keep him from going back there because all the receivers got hurt. They couldn't have him get hurt. Yeah.
Kevin, would you spend money on a running back? People are really high on Okrowski Merritt. They like Chris Rodriguez a lot. Rodriguez is a restricted free agent, but you can potentially bring him back with a pretty limited market, in my opinion. I feel like, you know, when you're restricted, he's not going to be pursued, you know, highly pursued. He'll get a couple $1 million here or there. There are big names: Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, Kenneth Gainwell. There's other guys on the market as well. Rico Dowdle. Do any of those names kind of tickle your fancy? Are you interested in any of those guys, or wait for the draft?
I'm a big Kenneth Walker III fan.
I like him a lot too.
I think he's really good. Going back to Michigan State, he was really good. And I think we're going to see that running game, by the way, in the postseason be much better than it was during the regular season. I don't know why Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker III didn't have massive years. They had big games against the 49ers in that game for the 1 seed. But I don't think that you go nuts. I think the interesting thing would be if Jeremiah Love's sitting there at 7 and let's just say David Bailey's gone. You know, Bailey and Bain are gone, and then Love is sitting there. You know, we've seen the resurgence of running backs, and we've seen him take over games. I mean, Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs and Barkley last year, and Derrick Henry in
Even
games.
McCaffrey scored 2 touchdowns last
Well,
week. Yeah.
McCaffrey is, McCaffrey's really the outlier because he's just such, and Bijan too, because
Yeah,
Bijan's yards from scrimmage, I think, led the league this year, right?
I believe so.
I
Yeah.
think it did.
Him or
If
Gibbs or
you
something. Yeah. Go ahead.
if you feel like you're going to get one of those guys, I think and he's the best player on the board. I think you have to think about it because they are having so much impact. I mean, check down stuff to Bijan ends up going for 30 yards.
Mhm.
So you think about that. But I like Rodriguez restricted, as you mentioned. I think you got to bring him back. I think you bring back, of course, Krosky Merritt's already back. It's not a bad running back room if that's the way it sits with McNichols. And
Mhm.
that's what you end up having. You have much bigger issues than O-line, running back, and quarterback.
Mhm.
You need it. I think you need another wide receiver,
Absolutely.
much more so than you need another back. But you need another playmaker. That's why if they lose Debo and you're trotting out Terry and who else?
Well,
McCaffrey and Lane and
let's
Yeah,
talk
Yeah.
about the
and tight
a little
ends.
let's talk a
Yeah.
little about the draft then before we wrap. I know it's early in the process.
Yeah.
So, but George is one of these guys that would draft wide receiver in the first round or two every year. That's just how you kind of do in today's
not
market.
not in the first or second. I always want a wide receiver every year, but I'm not opposed to getting
Right.
one in the first round this year. Go ahead.
Right.
Do-
Well,
would
if the
you
Ohio
say-
State receiver was out this year, he
Or no
wouldn't be
Tate.
available. He'd
Oh,
be number
Jeremiah
one.
Smith.
If
Yeah.
Jeremiah Smith were available, he might go before Mendoza.
Yeah.
I mean,
for
he
sure.
would have been the number
Generational.
one pick. Yeah. He would have
Yeah.
been the number one pick last year.
I agree.
And can they afford? Do they have the luxury? We just talked about Love. George and I are both are huge Caleb Downs fans. Do they have a luxury of taking a safety that high if he's going to be Earl Thomas, Ed Reed, somebody like this?
Yeah, it's 7 overall. If they can't trade back, because that would be the best thing, volume over, quality, because it's a crapshoot on all of this, as we know. But if they are there at 7 and they see a superstar player, you take them. They don't have enough A-plus players. They don't have enough, as Cooley used to call them, blue chip players.
Mhm.
I
They're
mean,
all Reds.
Trent
Yeah.
Williams was always the only one like on the team. That was it.
Exactly.
And you have one, we think, certainly at quarterback and at left tackle, but you don't have anything on defense. So you got to take best player available, as long as it's not a quarterback or a left tackle, and you hope it's a defensive player because you really need defense. But yeah, Downs, Bain, Bailey, Reese. I mean, there are a lot of different people that I'd think about, but it's going to be Adam Peters has to be right, has to be right about that. But I hope it ends up being on defense.
Go ahead, George.
I say my last question, Kevin. I know you're going to get out of here pretty soon. Has your faith wavered at all with Adam Peters in the regime? Because I know it's a polarizing topic. Like, you get phone calls a lot. I think we've seen enough, Kevin, over the last 20, 30 years for what a unstable organization looks like. I think we finally have stability. So I'm willing to kind of ride it out. But what's your thoughts on Adam Peters and overall?
I just think that this year is impossible to evaluate. They were the most injured team in the league. They were the most injured team at their most important positions with their best players, which is much further than just saying man games lost. I mean, they had, going into the final, 83 man games lost with their week 1 starters. I mean, they were decimated. The San Francisco example, Doug, that you brought up is a good one, but it's totally the exception to the rule. It never happens the way it happens with San Francisco. When you lose as many good players as Washington did this year, 9 times out of 10, you lose more games than you win, period, especially when one of those players is your best player at quarterback. So I think it's impossible to evaluate this season. I've said that, and people, will say injury excuses, excuse maker. Look, I don't expect them to make the excuses publicly. That you don't want to hear that from them. But we're in the observation business, and we know the NFL. The healthiest teams win. the teams that are most injured lose. And that's just a reality in the NFL. It's not an excuse. They are reasons why they went 5-12. I will say this, though, the defense, even if healthy, I don't think it was going to be a very good defense.
I agree with that too.
So but offensively, they would have been much better had they been healthy from the start.
Who do you like down the stretch here?
Man, it's so wide open. I've liked Houston for a couple of months, and I have an AFC Championship future on Houston from back in early November at 30-1. So I am really hoping Houston gets to the Super Bowl, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's almost anybody. I think before the playoffs, I liked the Rams in Buffalo or the Rams in Houston. I still like the Rams a lot, even though they have kind of limped a little bit, including last week at Carolina. But I still like the Rams.
Yeah.
And who do you like for the national championship?
Well, I would have said Miami before the Peach Bowl and the other semifinal game, but God, Indiana's so impressive. But I love watching this Miami team. They are so good in the trenches, and that's going to be a fun matchup to see. Is Miami's O-line and offense against that Indiana defense, which has been the underrated part of their team all year. But remember, Penn State almost beat them. And Ohio State almost beat them in the Big Ten title game, but they're really good. I mean, so well coached, really good. And I wasn't a big believer in Mendoza as a pro. I am now. Like, to me,
how I am.
Yeah, to me, he's obviously number one overall. He's big, he's super accurate, and he's more athletic than I think people understood during the regular season.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Kevin, you're the best, buddy. We always
you guys are great. Love coming on with you.
All right.
Cool. Thanks,
Anytime.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Bye.